Hello YouTube, this is Night of Misfortune bringing you the continuation of my time lapse of my map making process. Last time I really did a quick time lapse for an introduction video. I think now we can delve a little bit more into the specifics. I think this video is going to be mostly about mountain placement, but I think I'm going to talk about some things to consider when deciding how to do your land masses and overall mountain positioning. So I kind of went into what brush set I've been using for this last video, but I will most likely include it again and say that it's been a pretty good brush set, although I think it's repetitive, but that's probably because I've seen all of the mountains like 3 times already. You're gonna see a lot of mountains on this map, so yeah, I'm kind of sick of mountains. As you can tell by the end of this video, I think I spent a solid 12 hours on mountains, so probably sick and tired of them. Anyway, the dude that made these made them completely free for everybody to use for whatever purpose, so it is really quite wonderful. So go ahead and check him out. Links down in the description below. But regardless, what things should you consider? Well, I think you should begin with obviously the outline of your continents, and the outline of your continents doesn't matter too much. Of course, you can consider plate tectonics and so forth, in which case that will have a direct impact on your mountain placement, but I don't really go that hardcore into it. I just go with whatever I want to make my world, and I try to make the broken pieces kind of fit. So like if there's a bay in one area, I'm gonna make an island that's close by kind of fit into that, and you kind of see a reminiscence of that all over my map. So, you know, I kind of follow plate tectonics semi-strictly, if you know what I mean. Like, I'm sure there's a science to how you can determine exactly the sizes of your continents and the relative positions and stuff. That's way too much for what I'm doing here, even though I do want it to be accurate. There's always, you know, things like magic that can do stuff, and you see me looking at some references, you know, of maps as well, and plate tectonics here as well. So I do try to take it in consideration as much as I can, but I don't go over the top when I do that. From then on, I really consider the shape of my continent and then where I want the mountains to be. So if I don't take into consider plates, then positioning of mountains is really left up to you. But I do kind of, you know, stay aware of why mountains form, and it's obviously plate tectonics. In the magical world, it can be different things. For example, you know, a mountain range in my world might be formed because of a battle of titans in the past, just as an example. Of course, I'm not going to give you real examples because my players might be watching this, but I think it's a cool thing to consider for you guys. So anyway, once you figured out the placement of your mountains, well, before you kind of finish that thought process, you also want to consider what impact this placement is going to have on the rest of your world, because something I do consider is climate, and I do try to make climate as realistic as I can. And I try to decide what the movement of water will be in my world, and I'm not sure when exactly I'm going to draw the and you can see here I'm actually checking that and how the grass looks and how the coloring changes about across mountains. So essentially, when water moves across mountains, the clouds that move across the mountains stop, and most of the rain falls on one side of the mountain, so the other side will be fairly dry, and maybe even desert or boreal or something like that. You can see me here start to place trees, and that's why it's important, because trees are going to be on the side from where precipitation comes from. I'm really hoping I show you kind of what I decided for my cloud movement and precipitation movement pattern, because you can see me placing the trees on one side, on the side that the precipitation is coming from, and on the other side the mountains are kind of blocking it off. And when we eventually get to the coloring stages, you'll see that, but now you can kind of see it in the other 2 continents, the small icon image in the top right-ish of your screen. You can kind of see how it's green over there on the left, and then less green on the right, especially where the mountains are. And that's because most of the precipitation is moving from the left across towards the mountains and stops at the mountains. But I do have another front moving from the top and kind of curving around the coastline of that second continent. And that's why the rightmost part is a little bit more green. And you're going to see this. I'm not going to color this in any of well, I will eventually color it, but it won't be for a while because I wanted for this new continent to really focus on placing everything before I start coloring. And you see me I figured out what was wrong with my forest. I think I was breaking them off too rapidly, and that resulted in unrealistic forests, because unless it's a man-made effect where people are cutting the forest down, I think it's really unnatural for it to just end. So I try to place a little bit of trees sporadically around. And here I'm switching to a little bit of a pine, or a I think what are they called, deciduous trees? I'm not sure. I'm not into that kind of labeling, I guess. But here I switch into a little bit more of those northern pines and so forth, because it's actually going to be northward, is going to be to the bottom left of my map. So I wanted to shift that and show climate again, because you have to consider basically where your north and south is. And while I can, blame magic for shaping that continent, to be snow and things like that, I'd like to keep realism in that part, because this is a planet. I didn't want to, maintain the biomes and the basically the lines of the equator and stuff like that. And this is probably like 1/2 of my world, because it gets hotter towards the center and there is no North Pole. Yeah, so south would actually be to the bottom left now that I'm thinking about it. North would be the opposite direction. Anyway, here I'm redoing these forests because I realized I was doing them on the wrong layer, which sucks. I actually liked quite a bit more how it turned out the first time. I think I was a little bit upset and went a little bit faster on the second way through, but it still looked decent. So here I'm just placing more trees. Let's see, what else should you consider? I think that's the biggest parts. I mean, I think you generally want to start your process. Yeah, here I'm showing you the pathway of my precipitation. So the rightmost part, I really needed to have desert right there on the right, where I just made a big blob. That needed to be for desert. So I really needed mountains. So probably in the next episode, or in a few episodes, I'm going to place another mountain range over there to kind of block more precipitation. And here I'm removing a little bit of mountains to make room for a jungle. So that's what I was trying to say earlier, is you want to start out, just figure out what you want in your world, and then make the world shape to what you want it to be. If you want a desert, you got to make the islands, or sorry, the mountains fit that storyline. So you can't just have a desert in the middle of nowhere. Deserts really don't even come up to the coastline, although if it's like in the Sahara Desert, you can see that it does come up to the coastline. But that's because it's straight up on the equator. Normally it doesn't do that. Normally it's behind mountains or in the center of the landmass, because precipitation again does not reach there. You can see me adding a couple of more trees here. You also saw me reposition that island because I didn't want it to block the precipitation movement, because at the end it's actually going to be a set of volcanoes. So I kind of wanted it to be a little bit far removed. And again, I scanned this map in, hand-drawn. And if you want me to teach you how to manipulate the objects that you've already drawn, it's a really quick tutorial. It's not too complicated, but I think it's better to dedicate a video to it rather than showing you it in a time lapse. So do request that video, or if any other Photoshop tutorial that you might want, or a map making tutorial, and I'll be happy to show you. I can even hand draw a whole map. It won't look good because again, I'm using brush sets for trees and for mountains, and that's because I suck at drawing them. I didn't want to waste a lot of time doing it. So for icons, the majority of the icons I'm going to draw, there's a couple of brush sets that I found that I really like the buildings, but I might trace them anyway to make it my hand drawings. So, I try to keep it as much of it as possible, my own drawings, but for trees and mountains, I could not do it. And I go into a little bit more detail about that in my introduction video, but I think this video, we kind of delved into a lot of the specifics or more into the specifics in my approach to map making. And here I'm adding that mountain range I was speaking about earlier because I do need it to block off that precipitation that was moving from the bottom of the map to, again, make that narrative of a desert in the center of the continent. And I kind of thought about a really cool pass here, and I think I'm going to name it Serpent's Pass because one of my favorite games, Guild Wars 1, there's a cool pass called Lornar's Pass, I believe, and it was just like, it was this cool speed running location. If you know that game, you probably know what I'm talking about, and that's just going to be the inspiration for that. It's probably going to be full of stuff, interesting things. I don't want to go into too much details again because my players might be watching, but I think it'd be quite cool to explore that. So I'm just filling in more mountains. I think this mountain range didn't... The problem I have with this brush set is that these mountains don't look tall enough. But again, we're zoomed out so much that it probably makes sense that not all of these mountains are that big. But again, it would have been nice to have more of them poking out because the big mountains, there's only like maybe 5 brushes and they do kind of get repetitive. One of which the brush is like weird. The mountain looks literally like a butt. You might catch it here or there. Here I'm doing more consideration. A lot of my time was spent like considering these water movements. And again, here I'm making a little bit more of a farmland. So I'm starting to plop down those, man-made icons and so forth, adding a forest here because again there's water movement from the bottom of the map too. And it turned out, because my map is kind of slanted with the south pointing to the bottom left, that actually crosses the same line where the other similar trees are of the type are. So that's why I didn't put those as pines, is because it actually curves downwards and actually is the same biome as a little bit higher up on the left of the map. There I wanted a marsh, and I think it made sense. So again, I'm placing down a marsh, and to make a marsh more real, you have to have a lot of moisture leading up to it, not just from cloud movement, but also from rivers. So I have a pretty big river intersection, a lot of rivers making this big river, and eventually I'm actually going to split it up even more. Rivers I hand draw using my digital pen. I think it makes for a more natural curve if you do it hand for pretty much anything. Obviously I tried to do as much as possible via the hand, and then I just manipulate the thickness based on the pressure of the pen and just make it as thicker towards the ending. And of course you want to consider the fact that rivers never diverge, they always merge. So that's why you don't see any of my rivers diverge, even though that would have been cool to have. I don't do that. And then finally, somebody asked how I consider the placement or the beginning of my rivers. Again, it's where I want the rivers to be, but they always start at a mountain or a lake, because again, that water is going to run off the mountains and it's going to pile up at the bottom of those mountains and form a river that's running down. So I think I went a little bit over here, but thank you very much for watching. As always, please do make your suggestions below, and I hope to see you in a future video. Thanks. Bye.